I was going to jump. I had weighed the options. I wasn't about to go out and buy a gun, and I had developed enough of a tolerance that I couldn't be certain pills would work. And I'm too much of a coward to slit my wrists, so I was going to jump. I had settled on the common idea that if just one person smiled at me on the way, I'd turn around and try to get help. If anything, I suppose it was the last little part of me that held some semblance of hope for the future. Naturally, I received no smiles the entire way to the bridge, so I was going to jump. As I peered into the waters below, I saw a face. Not a fish, and not quite human either, but a face nonetheless. A face that stared back at me with an unusual smile, a smile that, far from the kind I had imagined I'd see from any passerby, held a sort of joyous contempt. You see, I was going to jump, but something about that smile wound up saving my life, because it seemed to suggest, "Go ahead, I can't wait to meet you." When you are admitted to a hospital, they place on your wrist a white wristband with your name on it. But there are other different colored wristbands which symbolize other things. For example, the red wristbands are placed on dead people. There was one surgeon who worked on night shifts in a school hospital. He had just finished an operation and was on his way down to the basement. He entered the elevator, and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. When the elevator door opened, another woman was about to enter when the doctor slammed the close button and punched the button to the highest floor. Surprised, the woman reprimanded the doctor for being rude and asked why he did not let the other woman in. The doctor said, "That was the woman I just operated on. She died while I was doing the operation. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman smiled, raised her arm, and said, "Something like this?" Our marriage had hit a tough patch, but I never thought it would be this bad. She would never say goodbye when I left for work, never look me in the eye when I talked to her. I'd reach out to touch her, but even then her body felt stiff. She wouldn't acknowledge me. I honestly don't even know how we got here. We used to be so close, but something changed. My loving, warm wife had become cold and distant. It made me wonder if maybe it was finally time to bury her. A boy was sitting in his classroom one day when he noticed a photo outside of his school laying on the grass. When school was over, he ran outside and picked up the photograph before anyone else had the chance to do so. Turning it over in his hands, he realized it was a picture of an incredibly beautiful girl. She had a smile on her face, with 2 fingers holding up. The girl was so pretty that he wanted to meet her. He showed the photograph to everyone in the school and asked if they knew her. Unfortunately, nobody recognized her. That night, when he went to bed, he placed the photo on his bedside table and went to sleep. Around midnight though, He woke up to something that sounded like a tapping sound on his window. Then he heard what sounded like someone giggling. He worked up the courage to investigate it. He jumped out of bed, went over to the window and opened it. But there was nothing there. The next night, he heard the tapping sound again. He looked out the window and could just make out a figure standing on the other side of the street. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like the mysterious girl in the photograph. With the photo in hand, he raced downstairs and out the front door. As he crossed the road, he forgot to look both ways and was suddenly hit by a car. The driver got out of the car and ran over to help the boy, but it was too late. The boy had been killed on impact. The driver noticed something clutched in the boy's hand. It was a photograph. Turning it over in his hands, the driver realized it was a picture of an incredibly beautiful girl. She had a smile on her face and was holding up 3 fingers. When I was 12 years old, I had a friend named Rachel. One day, Rachel didn't show up for school. She was absent for a week, and I began wondering if there was something wrong with her. I tried calling, but I didn't get an answer, so I decided to pay her a visit. It was already getting dark outside by the time I got to her house. When I rang the doorbell, I was shocked when the door opened almost immediately. Rachel's mother was standing in the doorway, but there was something odd about her. Her eyes seemed darker than usual, and her hair was hanging loose around her shoulders. Not a word came from her mouth. She beckoned at me to come in, and before I could say anything, she had slipped back into the darkened house. As I stepped inside, my eyes strained to see in the dark. Just then, I heard a humming sound and followed it into the kitchen. Standing at the kitchen sink, with her back towards me, was her mother. The moment I entered the kitchen, she stopped humming and there was an eerie silence. I sat at the kitchen table for around 5 minutes when I realized something was very strange about her. The whole time I had been sitting there, she hadn't moved a muscle. Her back was still towards me, and I couldn't see her face. Her hands hung limp by her sides, and her head was tilted slightly. As I approached her, she remained completely still. Slowly, I moved around her and tried to get a look at her face to see if she was alright. Her eyes were wide open, and she had an evil grin on her face. Needless to say, I bolted out of there. It wasn't until a few days later that I found out that there had been a tragic death in Rachel's family. "What?" I asked. "Who died?" My parents broke the sad news to me, and it made my hair stand on end and I was crying from fright. Rachel's mother had died suddenly, and the night I called over to her house, Rachel had been at her grandparents' place, attending the funeral.